Hey guys, my name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm gonna be filming my July wrap-up. I'm very happy to say that in the month of July, this is the month that I've read the most books that I've ever read in a month, because I read 16 books this month. Who am I? Out of those 16 books, I read 6 thrillers this month, 4 horror novels, 2 romances, 3 young adult contemporaries, and 1 literary fiction. It was quite a mixed bag, but it was mostly within my comfort zone. I was reading a lot of thrillers and horrors this month, and as far as some of my ratings went, I had only 2 5-star books this month, but I had 8 4-star books, 5 3-star books, and only 1 book that was 2 stars. So I mean, the ratings were mostly on the higher end. I only had 1 book that was below a 3 star, so that is a pretty great reading month in my opinion. I also wanted to let you know that 9 of the books that I read this month were audiobooks, so whoa. I feel like this month I was able to read so much because all of my audiobook holds came in from the library like literally at the same time. Like within the first week of the month, I was like, oh my gosh, I was doing nothing but listening to audiobooks. And then Libro has been hooking me up with their ALC program, which is this advanced listening copies program that they have now, and so they've been hooking me up with advanced copies of audiobooks, and I've just been listening to audiobooks. Like, I'm just literally laying in bed all the time listening to audiobooks, and it's been life-changing. I also wanted to say that I did 2 different reading challenges for myself this month. I did one video where I read some of my thriller arcs, and then I did another video where I read 3 new horror releases, and then I also participated in the reading rush, which was a readathon, even though that didn't go so well. But there was a lot of different like reading challenge things that I was trying to do for myself this month, so not gonna lie, I'm feeling a little bit burnt out after the month of July. I've just been trying to do so many things, but I'm very happy with the way that this month turned out. Yeah, let's just jump into what I actually read this month. So the very first book that I finished in the month of July was Invisible Girl by Jewell. This is an ARC copy from Atria Books, and this one doesn't go on sale till October 13th. And this is a book that I read for my Reading My Thriller Arcs video. I would say it reminds me the most of Watching You by Jewell, like in comparison to some of her other books, because it follows a bunch of different point of views in this neighborhood. It mainly follows this young girl, Sapphire, who goes missing, and then we kind of follow like her therapist guy who is like seeing her right before she went missing, and then we also follow from the point of view of this guy Owen, who's their neighbor, and he's kind of creepy and weird, and he's got some stuff going on, and it's just really interesting because we follow from multiple points of view in this book. I explain my thoughts more well thought out in my video where I read this book, so I will link that up above and down below if you missed that. But yeah, this was a 4 out of 5-star book for me. Second book I picked up this month was Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar, and I was so excited to finally get to this one. I actually did listen to the audiobook for this, and I read a little bit of it physically, but I mostly listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook is a very pleasant experience. It was very lovely listening to this audiobook. And if you didn't know anything about this, it's a young adult contemporary novel that follows a trans main character, which is part of the reason why I wanted to read it, because I want to say I've only read 2 or maybe 3 books that follow a trans character as the main character, so I feel like reading these kinds of books is always a really big learning experience for me, which is why I love to read them. But also, like, this was just the softest thing. It kind of reminded me of Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, in the sense that somebody is kind of like blackmailing them in this book in the same way that Simon is getting blackmailed in Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. But this book is really cute. The romance in it is really soft, and it feels like a genuine real group of like high schoolers in this book, which I really enjoyed. But also this book does have some like sad and sensitive moments because Felix's mom isn't really a part of his life anymore because she doesn't really accept his identity. And so reading this book isn't necessarily easy, but it does kind of have a lighthearted feel to it still, and I really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars because I had 0 issues with it, and I just had the best time listening to it, and the ending kind of made me cry a little bit. So third book that I read this month was The Shadows by Alex North. I received an art copy of this one from Celadon Books, so huge thank you to them. And I actually buddy read this book with Heather over from Bookables, and this one is a new thriller novel slash it kind of has some horror vibes to it. I was kind of hesitant to read this one because I wasn't a huge fan of The Whisper Man. I was pleasantly surprised by this one. I really ended up enjoying this. Follow our main character, Paul, who we kind of like get to see some stuff that happened in his teenagehood that made him want to leave the town in the first place, and then we're following him into present day when he's an adult and he's going back to the town, and he hasn't been back to the town in like years and years and years. And I kind of like love that trope in thrillers when like somebody's going back to the town they grew up in and it's like awful and hard for them and it's like spooky and weird. And this book is actually pretty spooky. It kind of has like Slender Man vibes, which is how me and Heather were describing it. And there's some weird stuff about like dreams in this book and the woods, and it's just very atmospheric and weird. And I will say the ending did kind of like lose me a little bit, so it ended up being a 4-star book for me instead of a 5 because the ending wasn't great in my opinion, but there is a really good plot twist at the end that I did not see coming, and I was here for that. Then the next book I read was The Swap by Robin Harding. This is another thriller that I read for that video, and this was one of my most anticipated thrillers because the premise just sounds so cool, because it's about these couples that swap partners, and then it's kind of a thriller about how things go wrong with that. But it's also kind of about this teenage girl who starts to get obsessed with this woman that's in one of the couples that does the couple swap. And honestly, just reading about these characters was just so freaking entertaining because they were just so, like, their relationships were just so interesting and so unique, I guess. But again, with like every other Robin Harding book, I did find this ending to be a little bit disappointing and just like not that great. And so I always end up rating her books 3 stars, even though I do think they have so much potential. They just never quite hit that mark for me. So they always just end up being like 3 stars, but they're still good. It's still really entertaining and I would still recommend reading it. And then the last thriller that I read for that video is Hurry Home by Roz Ney. I received this arc a little while ago, but this one actually just went on sale in July. And this one follows these 2 sisters who like haven't spoken in decades. And we're kind of going back and forth between the 2 sisters' points of views and trying to figure out what happened to make them like stop talking to each other in the first place. And I found this book to be just okay. It was a very standard thriller for me. There wasn't anything in this book that surprised me or that was like unexpected. I don't know, like I still enjoyed reading it, but it's not something I would necessarily recommend. It's your pretty typical thriller, I guess. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. All right, and then the next book that I listened to was an audiobook, and it was You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. And this one is a young adult contemporary novel, and it's gay, and it takes place in a small town, and it was just super cute. It follows this girl who decides to run for prom queen when she figures out that there's like a scholarship involved. If you win prom queen, you get some money for college, and that's like literally the only reason why she wants to do it, because she needs the money for college and she doesn't really like believe in all the hype of prom and all that. But then it's about how she starts to fall for one of the girls that's her competition, and it's just like really adorable, really soft, really cute. And yeah, I gave this book 4 stars. It was really cute. I adored it a whole lot. And then next up I read Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. I listened to the audiobook for this one as well. I kind of like read some of this physically, but mostly was listening to the audiobook. And the audiobook for this one is so much fun to listen to because this one has very like Red, White, and Royal Blue vibes, because it's a male-male romance and they're both kind of like in the eye of the media. So one of the guys in this book, his parents are like rock stars and he's just really like well known, and he has like a really bad reputation, so they want to like clean up his image by setting him up with a guy that's like a lot better like to the public eye. And so they set them up so that they have to be fake dating so that the public thinks that he's like got his shit together now. And so it's like fake dating romance, and it's just really cute and really soft, and I just had a really fun time reading this. I don't think this one was quite as great as Red, White, and Royal Blue to me because Red, White, and Royal Blue really like hit me emotionally with like the political stuff in there, but this one was cute. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like, it was a fun time. And then the next book I read was another audiobook and it was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo, and this book was really great. Just like all of Elizabeth Acevedo's books, I find her writing to just be so freaking beautiful, and I feel like if you're gonna read an Elizabeth Acevedo book, you have to listen to the audiobook because her audiobooks are narrated by her, and just the way she brings her characters to life with her voice, it's just a magical experience. And this book is told in verse like some of her other books. It follows these two girls who are sisters and they don't know that the other exists, and so we kind of get both of their timelines as they're figuring out that their dad has recently died in a plane crash, and because of this accident it helps them figure out that the other family exists, and they didn't know that their dad was like living this double life. So this book tackles a lot of really sensitive subjects, like the main one obviously being grief and like dealing with the fact that you didn't even know you had this sister across the world, but also that your dad wasn't really everything you thought he was. And this book was beautiful. It was really sad. It was very poetic and just like amazing. Yeah, I ended up giving this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I do think this one might be my favorite from Elizabeth Acevedo. I don't know yet, I have to think about it, but this one or the Poet X are my favorite. I don't know, they're both great. All right, so the next 3 books that I read were all the 3 books that I read for that video that I did of reading 3 horror novels. The first one was Survivor Song by Paul Tremblay, and this book has got to be the biggest disappointment of 2020 for me so far, because I just expected to love this because the premise is just so cool. It's basically an apocalyptic horror kind of book where there's a virus spreading by saliva, and it has a 1-hour incubation period. People are getting infected left and right. It's taken over the world. It's a pandemic. And so I thought this is going to be terrifying because it would hit very close to home. And while I thought the apocalyptic pandemic aspect of this book was so cool, it was such a bore, such a drag. Literally nothing even happens in this book. Like, oh my gosh. We mainly follow these 2 women. One of them is a doctor and the other one is this 8-month pregnant woman. And we kind of follow them along their journey of trying to get to the hospital. And this book was like super frustrating to read because I just kept waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen and for it to like pick up and get interesting, and it never happened. So that's a disappointment, but I ended up giving this one 2 stars. It was definitely my least favorite thing that I read this month, and I can't even believe that because I thought I would love it. And then I read The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I did listen to the audiobook for this one as well, and this book was really interesting. This book is a horror, but I would also classify it as maybe more literary fiction kind of vibes. But this book is an own voices story, which I think makes it feel more important and authentic. And this book kind of gave me this fear of elk in the same way that Imaginary Friend gave me a fear of deer. I don't know why, whenever there's writing in books that describes like animals behaving very oddly, it really scares me. Like, that's something that like gets to me because like, oh my gosh, animals behaving kind of like strange just really scares me. So this book definitely had that going for it, and some of the imagery in this book was very vivid and it just felt like I could see it. But honestly, I feel like the ending went a little bit over my head. I feel like I was rereading, like re-listening to the ending over and over again, and I still couldn't fully grasp what was happening. And I feel like some parts of this book were just really slow. Like, it was more literary fiction, I think, than anything, so it just wasn't really what I was expecting going into this one, but I still really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. I just didn't love it the way that I wanted to. And then the last horror book that I read for that video was Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and surprisingly enough, I was originally gonna DNF this book after 50 pages because I could not get into it, but then it ended up being my favorite thing that I read for that video. So if you struggle with the beginning of this book, just push on through because it definitely gets better. This one is a Gothic horror novel that's kind of like historical fiction because it takes place in 1950s Mexico, and it follows this girl who is going back to her cousin's mansion. She's trying to figure out what's going on with her cousin because her cousin is saying that the house is haunted and that the walls are talking to her and that all these weird shenanigans are happening. And this book was a very wild and fun time, and it was very spooky, and it had the best like haunted house vibes. Like, there's a scene in a cemetery and it's like foggy and like very atmospheric. And I don't know, I feel like the ending did have a pretty good plot twist as well. Like, there were definitely some things that happened in this book that I did not expect, and I thought it was like a really cool twist. And not to mention, this book has a playlist on Spotify that the author created, and the vibes of the playlist while you're reading this book is just an experience. It makes it so much better. So I will link down below the playlist if you plan to read this book, because you have to listen to the playlist while you read it. It's amazing. But yeah, while I didn't like absolutely love this one, I still think it was a really fun book, and I would still recommend it as a horror book, and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. All right, and then the next book that I read this month was The Mother is Slump by Brit, Bennett. I finally got around to this one. Oh my gosh, I've been wanting to read this one for months. And I actually did listen to the audiobook for this one. I checked it out from my library. And this book mainly revolves around these three friends through like their early teenagehood through most of their adulthood. And this book touches on a lot of different things. Like the main thing is obviously motherhood is like the main running theme of this book, but there's also a lot of feminist talk in this book. There's a lot of talk about like abortion and also like how challenging it can be to be Black in contemporary America. Like there's some really gorgeous quotes in this book that I just want to read you like one of them that really like stuck with me. One of them says, "Reckless white boys became politicians and bankers, but reckless Black boys became dead." And I really enjoy this quote too, and she says, "Suffering pain is what made you a woman. Most of the milestones in a woman's life were accompanied by pain, like the first time she has sex or birthing a child. For men, it was all orgasms and champagne." Ugh, like I just love that so much, and I just love the writing in this book. Like it was all very like lyrical like that, and it just had so many great statements, like statement quotes, and I just really enjoyed this a whole lot. And there's kind of like a love triangle kind of happening between these three characters throughout the entirety of the book, and it was good. It was really beautiful, and yeah, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed my time reading this. The next book that I read this month was His and Hers by Alice Feeney. I also listened to this one on audiobook, and I flew through this audiobook within 24 hours because I could not put it down. And this one is an adult thriller, and Alice Feeney is always one of those authors that's either like a hit or miss for me, so I never know what I'm getting myself into when I pick up her books. But this one was a really fun time. I think it might actually be my favorite Alice Feeney book so far, because we follow this woman in this book named Anna who works at a news station, and then we also follow this guy who's a detective for the police, and they're both coming back to the town that they're from because there's the murder of this woman. And the detective, the dude, while he's like getting involved in the investigation, he realizes that he knows who she is, and then he quickly becomes a suspect in his own investigation. Not only do we get the dual point of views in the audiobook, which makes it really entertaining to listen to, but we also get a third narrator that's like this anonymous like creepy voice that's the voice of like the killer, of like the murderer, but it's like muffled and creepy, and I don't know, it's super weird, super creepy. Some of it was like giving me chills, and this book is actually a lot darker than you would expect. Like the ending just like got really gritty and dark, and it like gave me goosebumps, and I was like, what did I just read? So this book was very surprising. It had some good twists in here that I did not see coming. I feel like this is one of those books where every chapter kind of ends on a little cliffhanger. Like it just gives you something that you want to continue to read it. So that's why I literally had to read it so fast. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars, probably closer to a 4.5 out of 5 stars, because it's still so strong in my memory since I finished it. All right, and the next book that I read this month was The Bright Lands by John Fram, and I'm so stoked to say this was definitely my favorite book that I read in the month of July. This was actually the first book that I read for the reading rush, and huge thank you to John Fram for being like the kindest human being ever and sending me this copy for review. But this novel is a horror thriller novel, and it follows this gay man named Jewell who's currently living in New York, but he has to go back to his small conservative town in Texas when his younger brother goes missing, and his younger brother is like a high school football player. And this book, like I just said, I love books where like a character has to go back to their small town that they grew up in because like there's weird shit going on. That's like one of my favorite tropes. And in this book we follow so many points of views. We follow like so many people in the town, including like the sheriff, the younger brother's friends, and his girlfriend, and like all these different people. And so I definitely had to keep a list of like who is who while I was reading this book, because it's very easy to get confused because there's just so many characters. But oh my gosh, this book is so it's so great. It's so atmospheric, and the vibes, I've seen a lot of people describe this as like Friday Night Lights but gay, or like Stephen King but gay, because it definitely feels very Stephen King to me. But like I need more of these kinds of books in my life, like gay authors writing gay horror books, like yes. And this book is very gay. It definitely follows through on the fact that it's like a gay horror novel, and I just love it for that. And The ending of this book is like an acid trip, like it's crazy. And this is definitely one of those books where you can just sit there for hours thinking about it and looking up a million different theories that everybody else has. And I love books that promote discussion among readers and that you literally can't stop thinking about it, because I literally want to reread this book just so I can dissect the ending all over again. And I love that. Oh my gosh, I feel like I could do an entire spoilery discussion about this book because there's just so much to talk about. And yeah, this book was 5 stars. Like, do I even need to say that? Because it's probably obvious. I just can't wait to see what John Fram writes in the future, because I definitely think he's a super promising horror author. Like, I just can't wait to see his future works. Alright, the 15th book that I read this month was The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This was the second book and the last book that I read for the reading rush. Yeah, totally bombed the reading rush this year, but whatever, it's fine. So this one is an adult thriller that I was so stoked to read because I loved The Guest List. Like, The Guest List is one of my favorite books of 2020, and it kind of has a very similar premise to The Guest List. Like, not gonna lie, it's almost like too similar, because this one follows this whole group of friends. You're following like a huge cast of characters just like The Guest List. They're all going to this like remote cabin kind of for New Year's Eve, so you're following them over a period of like 3 days. And it's like you're following 3 different couples and then one girl that's single and then the 2 people that are working at this place. Some of the point of views are in the present day on like January 2nd where they like find a body, and then most of the point of views are on New Year's Eve where you're kind of figuring out what happened to somebody getting killed. And it's kind of like The Guest List where you don't know who got killed at the beginning of this, but you're trying to figure that out, and then once you do figure that out, you're like, well then who did it? And it's constantly like twisty turny movie. And I did think this one was good. I think I would have enjoyed this more if I hadn't read The Guest List first, because I read The Guest List first, I was just like, this is like The Guest List but not as good. I also partially listened to the audiobook for this one, which was really fun because the audiobook had a lot of different voice actors on it because it's a full cast. At the end of the day, I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Like, it was just okay for me. It just didn't wow me the same way The Guest List did, I guess. And then the last book that I read in the month of July was You Had Me at Ola by Alexis Daria. And this one I listened to the audiobook for. I got an advance copy for the audiobook. This is a romance that I was really looking forward to, and I enjoyed it for a lot of reasons, but I also feel like it was a pretty standard romance experience for me. I really loved the audiobook though because I loved listening to their voices, and the fact that this book is about these like actors who are working on a telenovela, it felt very like Jane the Virgin to me, which I really liked for that reason. I don't know, I feel like the ending of this book kind of started to like get annoying to me. Like, the male lead started to drive me kind of crazy. I don't know, it ended up just being like okay, like it's not going to be very memorable for me, I think, so I ended up giving this one 3 stars. But yeah, those were all of the books that I read in the month of July. It was quite a bit, and to be honest, I'm feeling a little bit burnt out, so I'm just going to try to take it easy on myself for these first few weeks of August, at least until Summerween starts. But yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts are on them, and let me know what you read in the month of July. How many books did you read? What was the best book you read this month? And thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye.